lying to you, saying nothing's going on, and it's her that he's cheating with.
Yeah, betrayal is really a devastating thing. At the end of any marriage is very sad.
There are artists who entertain, and then there are artists who endure. Shania Twain belongs to the second category, and after 6 decades of living, she is finally ready to tell the whole story. Not the polished, radio-friendly version. Not the carefully managed press release version. The real one. The one that begins in a freezing cold house in northern Ontario, runs through abuse, poverty, disease, betrayal, and near death, and arrives at something that looks, against all odds, like peace. At 60 years old, Shania Twain has confirmed what many of her fans long suspected. The woman behind the sequined outfits and the chart-topping anthems was carrying a weight that most people could never imagine. The rumors were never really rumors. They were fragments of a truth she wasn't yet ready to speak aloud. Now, she is speaking. And the world is finally listening. She was born Eileen Regina Edwards on August 28, 1965, in Windsor, Ontario. The name Shania came later, along with everything else she would build from scratch. Her early years were defined not by music lessons or encouraging teachers, but by survival. When she was just 2 years old, her parents separated, and her mother Sharon raised the children alone until she remarried a man named Jerry Twain, an Ojibwe man who adopted the girls and gave them his surname. The family relocated to Timmins, a small mining town in northern Ontario where winters dropped to -30 degrees and meals sometimes consisted of nothing more than bread and mustard. The house was cold. The electricity was frequently cut off. They moved repeatedly, sometimes 3 times in a single year, staying one step ahead of unpaid bills. But even in those conditions, something in young Eileen, now Shania, was already burning. By the time she was 3, she was singing around the house. By 4, she was picking out simple melodies on a toy guitar. Her mother recognized it immediately. Sharon began driving her daughter hundreds of miles to small talent shows, investing time and fuel they could barely afford into a voice that felt like the family's only real asset. What Shania has confirmed in her most candid interviews is that this early push into performance was not entirely innocent. She was singing in bars by the age of 8, performing past midnight for audiences of drunk strangers, earning $20 a show to help keep the lights on and food on the table. She has described the experience with heartbreaking clarity. The fear, the men in the audience who looked at her in ways that made her skin crawl, the instinct to make herself invisible even while standing under a spotlight. She wore layers of clothing to hide her developing body. She learned to smile through discomfort. She learned, very young, that her voice was both her protection and her exposure. And then there was Jerry. Shania has now confirmed, after years of carefully worded avoidance, that her stepfather was violent and that his behavior toward her crossed lines that no child should ever have to experience. She has spoken about witnessing him beat her mother savagely, one incident so severe that she feared her mother was dead. She has spoken about the abuse she herself endured. She was 10 years old. She dealt with it the only way she knew how. She sang. She wrote songs. She poured the unspeakable into music, which became both her prison and her escape. The arc of her public career is well documented. The debut album that underperformed, the move to Nashville, the years of cleaning houses and sleeping on couches while chasing a deal, the chance encounter with producer Robert John Mutt Lange that changed everything. The Woman in Me in 1995. Come On Over in 1997, which became the best-selling album ever released by a female artist, moving over 40 million copies worldwide. The Grammy Awards, the sold-out tours, the revolutionary image that scandalized traditional country music while simultaneously expanding its audience by millions. But what Shania has been confirming in recent years, piece by piece, interview by interview, until the picture is now undeniable, is the cost behind all of that achievement. Every milestone came wrapped in pain that the public never saw. The Lyme disease began in 2003, contracted from a tick bite while she was riding a horse near her home in Switzerland. 4 years, she did not know what was happening to her. She only knew that her voice, the instrument she had sacrificed her entire childhood to develop, was failing. She would black out for fractions of seconds at a time, multiple times a minute. Her vocal cords were sustaining nerve damage she could not explain. She was told by doctors that she might never sing again. She has described the grief of losing her voice as comparable to a death. Those are not the words of a woman speaking in hyperbole. That voice had been her lifeline since she was 3 years old. It had fed her family. It had saved her from a childhood that would have destroyed most people. And now it was disappearing while she was still in her 30s, at the very peak of what should have been her greatest triumph. In May 2008, Shania Twain was 42 years old and the most successful female country artist who had ever lived. She was also about to have her world dismantled in a single phone call. After 15 years of marriage, she discovered that her husband, Mutt Lange, had been having an affair. The woman was not a stranger. She was Marianne Thibaud, Shania's closest friend and personal assistant. The person who told her was Marianne's own husband, Frederick Thibaud, who had made the same discovery and reached out to Shania directly. What followed was one of the most quietly devastating periods of her life. She has confirmed in multiple interviews and in her autobiography that the betrayal did not just break her heart, it broke something deeper. It reopened every wound from her childhood. The feeling of being abandoned, of having the people she trusted most turn against her, of being utterly alone, it all came flooding back at once. She retreated to Switzerland. She shut herself away. She stopped making music entirely. What she has only recently confirmed in full is how close she came to not surviving that period at all. She has described standing on a balcony, looking down, ready to end her life. What stopped her was the thought of her son, Ija, who was 7 years old at the time. She has spoken about this moment not for shock value or sympathy, but because she believes other people need to hear that even the strongest seeming person can arrive at that edge, and that there is a path back from it. She found that path, slowly and imperfectly. She began therapy. She started confronting the childhood abuse she had buried for decades. She began the long process of grieving not just for her marriage, but for everything she had never been allowed to grieve before: the parents she lost in 1987 when they were killed in a head-on collision with a logging truck, the childhood that was stolen from her, the years of fear and silence and performance masks, and then, in one of the stranger and more poignant turns of a life that has never lacked for unexpected turns, she and Frederick Thibaud found each other. Two people gutted by the same betrayal, sitting in the wreckage of their respective lives. They married on New Year's Day, 2011, in Puerto Rico. She has described the relationship as a profound, unexpected healing, something she never could have planned and never would have predicted. The same year, she published her autobiography, From This Moment On. She was 45. The book sold over 100,000 copies in its first week and reached the New York Times bestseller list. In it, she named things she had never named publicly before: the poverty, the abuse, the stepfather who violated her trust and her body, the grief, the depression. Critics praised her honesty. Readers wrote to her in the thousands saying she had helped them find words for their own experiences. But even as she was rebuilding her personal life, her voice remained uncertain. The dysphonia caused by Lyme disease had created nerve damage in her vocal cords that no amount of therapy could fully reverse. In 2018, she underwent an extraordinary procedure. Fully awake, singing during the surgery, she had Gore-Tex supports inserted into her throat to help her vocal cords function again. She has said it was one of the most terrifying experiences of her life. She emerged from it with a visible scar on her throat, and she has said, more than once, that she is proud of that scar. She would rather carry the mark of survival than return to silence. Her comeback has been methodical, hard-won, and remarkable. The 2017 album Now was her first studio release in 15 years. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and sold over 130,000 units in its first week. She toured for it despite panic attacks, despite a voice that felt different in her body than it ever had before, despite the stage fright of a woman who had been performing since she was a child but was now learning, in her 50s, how to perform all over again. In 2020, COVID-19 nearly killed her. She developed severe pneumonia. Her lungs filled with fluid daily. Her antibodies collapsed. She was airlifted for emergency treatment and spent 12 days on plasma therapy. Doctors did not tell her at the time how close she had come to needing a respirator. She has said that surviving COVID gave her a renewed clarity about what she wanted to say and how she wanted to say it. That clarity produced Queen of Me in 2023. She was 57. The album addressed aging, menopause, body image, and self-acceptance with a directness that surprised even her most loyal fans. The tour that followed ran from April 2023 through November 2024, 75 shows across North America and Europe, earning over $114 million. She performed aerial stunts. She made audiences cry and dance simultaneously. She appeared at Coachella with Harry Styles. She posed for album art in a way that she described as a reclamation, not of her youth, but of her body, which had been taken from her in pieces since she was a child and which she was now, at last, claiming as her own. At 60, Shania Twain is not simply confirming old rumors. She is reframing the entire story. The rumors always circled the same questions. Was her childhood really that bad? Was the abuse real? Was the marriage as troubled as people whispered? Was she really as sick as some insiders claimed? Did she really come that close to losing everything, her voice, her marriage, her life? The answer to all of it is yes. And she is saying so plainly now, not because she needs vindication, but because she has lived long enough and healed enough to understand that silence was never protection. Silence was just another kind of suffering. What she wants people to understand, what she has been saying in fragments for years and is now saying whole, is that the life you see in the highlights reel is never the life that was actually lived. Behind every anthem about independence and strength was a woman who learned those values in the hardest possible classroom. Behind every sold-out arena was a little girl who sang in bars past midnight so her siblings could eat. Behind every glamorous photograph was a body that had been through disease, surgery, betrayal, and the kind of grief that doesn't announce itself, it just quietly hollows you out from the inside. She has forgiven people who hurt her. Not because what they did was acceptable, but because she refused to let their actions define the rest of her life. She has spoken specifically about forgiving Mutt Lange, not excusing him, not reconciling with him, but releasing herself from the weight of the anger. She has said it was the most selfish act of generosity she ever performed, and she means that as a compliment to herself. She has rebuilt a voice that doctors said was gone. She has rebuilt a sense of self that abuse and poverty and illness worked together to destroy. She has done it publicly, imperfectly, and with a persistence that is almost difficult to comprehend when you lay out the full timeline of everything she has faced. There is a version of Shania Twain's story that is easy to tell. Record-breaking album sales. Grammy Awards. A legacy that reshaped the boundaries of country music and made room for a generation of artists who followed. That story is true, and it is impressive, and it is worth telling. But at 60, she is insisting that the other story, the one that runs underneath, is worth telling too. Maybe more so. Because the achievement is not just the 100 million records sold or the tours that grossed more than any female country artist before her. The achievement is that she is here at all. That she survived a childhood of poverty and violence. That she survived the loss of her parents at 22 and raised her siblings alone. That she survived the slow theft of her voice by an illness that went undiagnosed for years. That she survived a betrayal that triggered a collapse so severe she stood on a balcony and considered not coming back from it. That she survived a pandemic that should, by any medical measure, have finished what everything else started. She is here. She is 60. She is unafraid of her own story in a way that she never fully was before. The rumors are confirmed. All of them. And the truth turns out to be exactly what it always looked like from the outside. A life of extraordinary difficulty, navigated by a woman of equally extraordinary resilience, arriving finally at something that looks, from every angle, like freedom.